Module 6, Environmental Policy. In looking at environmental laws, we can look at four types: compliance, conservation, cleanup, and pollution prevention. And we'll look at examples of these. Compliance involves legislation specifying business practices, uh, other social practices that impact health. And so you have legislation such as the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, which dictates what people can and cannot do uh, with hazardous products or anything regarding that can impact water, air, and so forth. A lot of these are much more focused on, again, on business practices and what business can and cannot do uh, with their chemicals or with their product. Conservation attempts to protect um, areas, animals, birds, historic areas, and so the issues become focusing on things that are perhaps at risk of damage or being lost to history, and tries to set up legislation to help support and protect these things. Cleanup, as it is, it identifies who's liable for funding and what are people's responsibilities in regarding the cleaning up of hazardous waste, chemicals, and so forth. Again, the idea here is to identify who's responsible and to identify funding sources to lead towards the cleaning and rehabilitation of areas. And pollution prevention is legislation is focusing on um, policies that would limit the production of chemicals within the environment, or ways to protect people in the environment uh, from pollution. And so, one at the top, Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act is significant, especially when we start talking about uh, practices such as fracking. Hydraulic fracking is actually a relatively new way for industry to access natural gas from areas which previously people were not able to access. But these activities have been found to have some harmful components to it. What happens with hydraulic fracking is they dig a well and run a pipeline far underneath the surface of the earth and start pumping in water chemicals into the area to break up the shale that contains the all the natural gas and other chemicals. The ideal deal here is that once you use this chemical, that's repiped back up and stored in a way that keeps it um, out of the watershed or out of anything that humans use. However, that's not so much the case. And so it's these fracking chemicals that have been shown to potentially pose some significant harms to people's health. Now, fracking fluid is not just one particular chemical. There's actually a number of different chemicals, each which with its potential harm to humans. And unfortunately, there's really no way. Each company who's involved has their own formulation, so there's no set recipe for fracking fluid. Um, and so some companies may use certain chemicals, others may not. Some may use in different proportions than others. And actually, the majority of the chemicals used in fracking still remain unidentified. and the ability for people to identify these chemicals, there's been numerous barriers being placed in not only by the industry but by politicians themselves. Now, in discussing the regulation of fracking, we have to start looking at 1974, when Congress passed the Safe Drinking Water Act. This is the act that sought to protect groundwater, especially drinking water, from pollution. And this was the existence, and then people were looking at, once fracking started to become more popular, issues of fracking in 96, uh, we're looking to regulate fracking fluids by the EPA and being subject under the Safe Drinking Water Act. In 97, U.S. Court of Appeals ruled the EPA must regulate fracking under that act. Um, but there continued lawsuits by the industry. Um, in 2001, he continued to focus on especially support from the federal government by the at the then Vice President Cheney to support the non-regulation of fracking on drinking water. And then in 2003, the president backs an energy bill that will exempt fracking from regulation, and which leads to 2005, which you have the Energy Policy Act, which officially exempted fracking from regulation. And so, while other industries, other companies are regulated as part of the Safe Drinking Water Act, fracking is not by law. And then in 2009, you have legislation introduced in Congress to protect water drinking, but you see a lot of pressure from politicians who are receiving support from their areas, from themselves, in regards to fracking, and so you have further research looking into the issue. And so, in the meantime, while there still has not been a federal law concerning fracking in 2010, Wyoming becomes the first state to mandate that the gas industry be fully disclose the chemicals that are being used in fracking. Others, other states follow suit to varying degrees. So, what is a good fracking disclosure policy? There's 4 points: requiring the disclosure of the chemicals, the baseline studies, um, anything related to its use within industry. Uh, Disclosure of plans, disclosure of construction of fracking facilities. Getting detailed information on all the chemicals used from all the companies involved in the process. Posting that information online so that people have access to it. And also limiting the use of trade secret claims. Now, this is where companies identify that they can't disclose certain chemicals because it's seen as a trade secret, that if they um, espouse it, that it will negatively affect their business activity. And many industries have been using that as a reason why they could not disclose the total amount, the total contents of their fracking fluid. And so a good policy would limit the use of the trade secret claims as part of it. And so, looking at this, we could then look to see what states have good or bad fracking policies. Now, looking at Ohio and what kind of protections are available here, for the most part, there's very insufficient protections. Uh, in regards to is chemical disclosure comprehensive, specific, and timely, is inadequate protections. In regards to is baseline data collected before the drilling begins, inadequate. Are there limits on confidential business information exemptions, that is the trade secret exemptions? Inadequate. The only place where there has been some protections in Ohio is availability of the data to the public from online sources. So, whereas in Ohio you may be able to access some information online, the quality of the information is questionable because of the inadequacy of the current legislation. And this is significant in that in fracking in Ohio is a significant industry, and that there's still significant influence from the industry in preventing the development of more protective and stronger legislation in regards to fracking.